alive, can't put me in a box. I redefine any definition you got. I am the tiger, I'm making steps to the top. The flames, I rip it up, you just gotta hand me the rock. Take a seat, you cannot stand it. All I know, the flow harder than a Scotch bunny. Don't try studying me, you cannot manage. This ain't what you want, bitch, I'm a fucking phenomenon. This ain't what you want, bitch, I'm a fucking phenomenon.
Hello. Hi, you guys. Welcome back to another discussion on Life Discussions with Dr. Jefferson. Welcome to the show. If you guys are viewing this show for the first time, I want to welcome you, and I want to encourage you to go ahead and subscribe and like and share the content, because you know what? Some of the stuff that we talk about today might resonate. And it may resonate in a way that it allows you to reshape your perspectives. So, man, there is just so much that I want to talk about today. There are so many things that I feel like impact the way that we look at relationships and the way that we look at survival in relationships in America today. Life Discussions with Dr. Jefferson is a platform where we talk about accountability conversations that affect the Black and Brown communities here in America. We also talk about conversations that are worldwide perspectives that may impact the way that we view relationships. My dog wants to be in here so bad. But so I feel like we have to be people who exercise a perspective that allows us to step into a place where we're exploring how we feel and we're exploring why we feel the way we feel about relationships. Good evening, Liz. How are you? So recently I had an opportunity to view some content of Cynthia G's. I've also, of course, viewed some more content of Kevin Samuels. I've had some time to sit with and view the actual podcast of Umar Johnson and some of the things that he's had to say. And so this conversation will go toward some of the things that I've learned shape the perspectives of people, young people entering into relationships nowadays, but also some of the things that affect the way that the Black and the Brown community view themselves and other people outside of themselves as it relates to building relationships or stability in life. Oftentimes the way that we see success or goals in life have a lot to do with the way we interact, not only with ourselves in those internal components of our system, but also the people that we are connected to, right? So I want to have this conversation, and I want to caution you guys from being too judgmental of the content that I might say, some of the terms that I might refer to today, because some of this stuff is going to be a bit triggering for some of you who have that vicarious trauma aspect in the Black community. Yeah, you can definitely tell that Umar has some issues, attachment and otherwise. But so I want to encourage you guys to definitely engage in a healthy conversation, exchange of dialogue in the chat. The chat is always pretty interesting to me. And I'm always looking for perspectives. And I feel like when you guys share your perspectives with me, I feel like we have a more collaborative conversation about the topics that we're definitely going to cover today, and then topics that we've covered in the past. So I want to start off by talking about social media, right, and the impact on social inhibition. And so for those of you who are in the chat, I want you guys to tell me what about not being able to be actually seen in real life, like that person to person experience. What about that when you think about social inhibitions? What about that experience removes the anxiety or the reluctance of people to say the things that they want to say? What do you think makes people more free to say what they want to say online versus in person with other people? So that's the first question for you guys in the chat. And I'm going to talk about that in a bit. So when we think about some of the things that shape the way that we respond to our external environment, right? If we're completely honest with ourselves, a lot of times when we are having in-person encounters, even if we went back to children on the playground and things like that, the way that we interact with people has a lot to do with what society accepts, what the people around us accept from us. And so when we talk about words, when we talk about the language, the way that we refer to people and the way that we look at ourselves, right? It has a lot to do with what we've learned is acceptable. I heard from, or I saw a comment that this follower of Kevin Samuels left on one of his shows. I want to say it was the last show that he did. And it was a female, and her comment went to the extent of saying that her parents had been married for, I think, 50 plus years or something like that. And they had been happily married. And over the course of her parents' marriage, she had learned from her mother that a woman's position is to be a helpmate to a man. And so if a woman is to go out and acquire a specialty skill or a degree, the degree needs to be a degree that complements and helps a man. Okay. She went on to say some things about she doesn't see why people that are females go out and get degrees in the fields of human science and things like that, because not only do these things not contribute to the stability of a man, but also these degrees don't really hold any value. There are no worth associated with these degrees, et cetera, et cetera. You said they are able to say what they want to say online. Yeah. So when you talk about real world consequences, I really kind of want to shift the conversation to Umar Johnson, right? So Umar is a person that has struck me as extremely peculiar. The way that he interacts online, the way that he interacts in person, these two types of interactions are very different. And I understand that, different people sometimes feel like they have to have a different version of themselves that they give out to the community versus the person they give out to their family, right? That type of energy. But I'm not talking about code switching. I'm talking about personality shifting. And so for Umar Johnson, what we see in his behaviors online and otherwise, where people have recorded his interactions and things like that, we see a guy that's very much imbalanced. And we do see a traumatic history because we know what his history was when it comes to him being sent off versus his siblings. But we also see the way that he refers to Black women who are single mothers. And some people have asked me the question that, they're like, well, we know that his parents have different last names. So were his parents married? And to answer you guys' question, because I know you guys have been pressuring me for that answer, like, Dr. J, you still didn't cover that. I have not been able to uncover any marriage records between the mom and father of Umar Johnson, but I do notice that there is a last name differential, but it doesn't mean that they weren't married, right? And unmarried parents or unwed parents does not equate to automatic attachment trauma. What really matters is the state of the emotions of the parents when the child is not only created, right, initially, but also after the child has been birthed into this world, the amount of psychosocial conditioning those two parents tether towards not only the child, but each other. the way that they respect and communicate with one another, the way they resolve conflict with one another, and the way that they address their emotional discord that may happen over the course of their relationship with one another. Those things definitely affect the way that that child develops a secure sense of self or an insecure sense of self. So that, and if you guys have some info, if you guys have, looked up something, discovered something around Umar's parents, and feel free to share. As you guys know, I'm a person who believes that we can definitely all learn from one another. Just because this is my platform doesn't mean that you don't hold validity or that you don't have access to resources that, I don't, right? So I feel like social media allows people who struggle with social interactions to be a version of themselves that they otherwise would not be able to be. And I feel like this has a lot to do with the increased amount of content creators as well. It has a lot to do with the type of content that's being put out here. Because when you're in person, it is easier to silence opinions that are extremely left or right when it comes to whatever the agenda is, right? So it's easier for us to say, okay, well, people will be at work. People will be at school during these hours. And so they can't attend your rallies. They can't attend these speeches that you have and things like that. For example, you guys are viewing me right now from the comfort. Some of you are at home, some of you at work, some of you in the car. You can listen to me no matter where you are, right? And the reality is you can listen to me at any given time. So you can catch the show live, or you can catch the show after the show is already done and it's posted. But you can see that there is something in the content or the description or the caption that captures your eye. And you're like, you know what? I want to be there for that conversation and I want to engage in it. So you can find this stuff after the fact. It's not like back in the day where you had to wait for a talk show to come on and you had to be present for it, right? At your home to watch it on television, because after it aired, it's not available anymore. And so one of the really important points that I want to make when it comes to the impact of social media on social inhibition is that people gain courage. They gain courage quickly, and that can be a dangerous thing. I'm going to be very honest. I've received several threats from people who follow Umar Johnson. I can imagine that other people who follow him and, put out content that goes against his agenda, I can imagine that they've also equally received threats, right, to their safety and their personal security. I want to say this: when people are online, they tend to get extremely, extremely bold, right? You get courage that you never had. It's almost like you're on the Wizard of Oz and you went to visit the wizard, right? I can't take you seriously. You're online, you're behind a computer, you make threats, make good on them. So for me, I'm a person who believes that people should be the same across the board. That's my personal perspective. But also, if we looked at the professional perspective of what balance looks like for people, for human beings, people need to be pretty consistent in their day-to-day in order for those people to be considered normal or within normal range. Because the reality is this: we're all systemically connected, and people learn how to deal with you based off of the way that you relate or deal with them. So literally, you teach people how to treat you with the way that you respond to them, the things that you say to them, and the things that you do as it relates to them. And so people will tether themselves to you or go and grow very far away from you in distance based off of the way that they interact with you. So that leads me to the next topic of discussion. I talked to you guys about the importance of this being a conversation around the human condition in the Black community. So now I want to talk about what you feel happened to the resiliency of the Black family, resiliency of Black people in the Black community. What do you feel is the one thing, the single most important thing that led to the devaluation of Black people, that led to an increase in violence, that led to a lack of resources, that led to fathers not being in the home or being prominent in the lives of their children, that led to women deciding to step out and make fathers, single fathers, that led to drug use, or whatever that is, whatever the thing is that you feel like it's a huge issue. What do you feel like led to that issue? Because I've had the chance to kind of sit with and evaluate the symmetry along the lines of what I hear Umar Johnson saying, what I hear Kevin Samuel saying, what I hear the MGTOW movement that is considered to be the Black manosphere now saying. I've had a chance to sit with some of Cynthia G's content and what she's saying. And what I found to be really interesting about Cynthia G is that she's a woman who says that her initial objective was to come to the defense of Black men, to elevate Black men, to support Black men online as a Black woman. And what I see is that she feels, as a response to where things started to grow towards after the internet, kind of took off and everything, what I see is that she felt there was not a need to elevate Black men, but now there was a need to defend the honor of Black women. Because according to Cynthia G, she's seen this declination in the valuation of Black women. And even when she speaks about how her following included lots of men who were queening her, crowning her, and very much, admiring her initially, those people, same men, of course, right? Sometimes there are different men, but for the most part, she's got the same type of following. So now these men have a different energy and they're going against those previous conversations where they valued her. And they really thought that she was a high value woman. So now it's let's dethrone her, right? And to be honest with you, I feel like we hear these things being pushed by Kevin Samuels all the time. He talks about, in his interview with Vlad, the importance of not overvaluing the Black woman. So I think that when you have men who have been traumatized and they trauma bond with someone like Kevin Samuels, someone that's equally or more toxic than them, that's what it equates to. And I've seen in some cases, some of his followers are extremely to the extreme. It was interesting because Kevin Samuels had a conversation that led him in the direction of saying that women need to be married, right? Because they have a biological clock that's ticking, right? Men don't have a vetted interest in getting married by a certain time. So it doesn't make sense for a woman to wait until she's in her 30s to then start to position herself to receive her king, basically, right? And so I made the comment that the reality is both men and women do have biological clocks, period. If we're going to look at that, it's just the point of contention that women have to get married because essentially women have to have babies, right? The reality is there is a lot of blame and shame going around the Black community. And Kevin Samuels says that single Black women with children are the demise and destruction of the Black community. You have Tommy Sotomayor saying that women with their single parenthood in the Black community and accepting welfare and all of these things, housing assistance, that these women are the centralized focus as to what's happened in the Black community. You got a lot of men saying that single women entering the workforce now feeling like they now have an education, they now have jobs, they now have their own income, and as a result, they don't need a man, right? All of this stuff. You have all of these things coming from the male side saying that women are responsible for the demise of the Black family, right? For the devaluation, for the lack of resiliency skills that are in the Black family and all that good stuff. We have all of these rhetorics that are going around, and who knows who's right? Because to be honest with you, blame holds no place in reshaping behaviors. That's the reality. So we can blame and point fingers at people all day, but it's not going to change anything. Taking accountability for our actions and the roles that we may play as these things happen to become an issue or something that we recognize as an issue. That's the way we find our ways to meaningful change in the Black community. And so that's what this channel is about, essentially. So, producer, let's go to that comment about a woman's place in the workplace or something like that. Something to that effect. That one is, that's the number one complaint of men, especially MGTOW men. Okay, there we go. A woman's place in the workplace means she doesn't need a man. Okay, so I want you guys to tell me how you feel about this comment. Just what are your thoughts? What's coming up for you? Because this is oftentimes the argument that you get from MGTOW men, and they feel like, okay, well, you know, if that's the energy that women have, then essentially I'm going to go ahead and do my own thing, and I don't have any energy to give to a woman if she's not appreciating me. He said, shaming tactics never really work, in my opinion. They don't. Because shame is meant to bring about guilt, okay? And that's one interesting thing that I'll talk about as I speak about this particular comment as it applies to Kevin Samuels' development of this whole sign thing. I think it's shame, insult, guilt, and name calling, probably, because he probably got that through his own therapy. So that's what we call the response of emotions, okay? But I think Kevin Samuels tries to use this as a means to lean on when he's identifying that women don't agree with him, and that's what they run to. But the interesting thing is that over the course of watching just one show with Kevin Samuels, I don't care what show it is, I've not been able to avoid him in his interactions with people who don't agree with him on his show. I've not been able to see him avoid shaming people, insulting people, guilt tripping people, and name calling people. Literally, that is his signature. It literally is. So I think that we have to be very honest when we say, obviously, he's a person who encompasses the same behaviors in which he says are unacceptable and that are feminine, because these are things that he notices women do when they don't agree with him. The other piece is this. I hear Kevin Samuels respond to the rumors that he is gay, quite frequently with the energy of, well, you know what? This is just a way of them insulting me. So I don't know how many people out here that are a part of the homosexual community or bisexual community when we talk about alternative lifestyle choices that differ from popular culture. However, what I'll say is this: people have an innate right to be who they will be and to live life freely without judgment, without being guilt tripped or shamed into other behaviors. I don't think that Kevin Samuels wants to give a response to that because he's out here self-labeling himself as an expert in some way of the Black relationship condition. He said it's just a fact of life for Black women having to work, whether they are married or not. Okay, great. And so I want you to now weigh in on this other one, which is typically the opposite argument. A man's position in life as far as finance means he doesn't need a woman. This is the opposite argument being made now by Kevin Samuels when he says that high value men, and we know that his high value man is a man who makes six figures and has been earning that said six figures for a duration of 2 to 3 years consistently, and that this man looks the part and has no kids typically. But if he does have kids, it's not a bad thing because it doesn't take away from his value, because when he earns six figures, he should be able to exercise his options with a woman. And so various MGTOW men are men going their own way. These are men that think and subscribe to the content that Kevin Samuels pushes in a huge way. So various people who have that position, who think like this, many of these men are like, well, you know what? I don't have to have kids. Life is about legacy, people. Legacy is the imprint that we leave on this earth. You know, one of those young men, that comment that I was going to talk about earlier, the young man put on there, he commented back to me that, no, the science speaks different. It's women that have the issue when it comes to their biological clock ticking. I will tell you guys this, and this is what I sent to him. Okay, science is ever evolving. And so we can only test what we're given the means to test. So oftentimes in the past, men have not gone to be to the fertility experts to figure out whether or not they were infertile. So when we do statistics, those statistics in the past have been based off of the couples. And so in couples, we've only had women going to fertility experts to be tested. So about 1 in 10, which is now moving towards 2 in 10 couples in America, have fertility issues. They have problems with conceiving a child. And oftentimes people look at the woman as the point of the issue simply because she's the person responsible for giving birth to a child. And the reality is, even in situations where women have fertility issues, right, that are preventing them from giving birth to a child, oftentimes, even in those instances, women can still conceive a child that is still biologically theirs. We have alternative means to assist women in doing that at whatever age. So when we talk about the factors that influence fertility in women and the factors that influence fertility in men, the facts that influence fertility issues in men, we cannot correct those things. So when you have a low sperm count or sperm immobility, naturally, if you're trying to become pregnant, it's going to be difficult even for us to assist you in the process of, even if we went to the lab and decided to fertilize the egg with your sperm, they may not, no. It may be very, very difficult for us to accomplish that. While women who have issues with the tilted uterus or just holding the child to term or becoming pregnant, there are lots of ways for us to impregnate a woman and a woman to have a child. A woman can have a different surrogate hold her child for her in their body, and it's still very much that woman's child. The issues with the men, however, when your sperm is no longer effective because you just ejaculate without effective, healthy sperm, there's nothing to do. We can't do anything with that. So the probability of a man being able to continue to reproduce healthy sperm, healthy, viable sperm later on into his 80s, because that's the comment the guy made, said men can continue to make babies in their 80s. There's a reason why they're not. Has nothing to do with the women going through menopause either. Yeah. But so what I'm saying is this: the same factors that hold true for a woman when it comes to fertility, when it comes to those legacy components, they hold true for men. The only thing is that oftentimes when we think about the sexual health of men, we don't think far into it. We don't think about the way that hypersexuality affects their sperm count. I don't know why. We don't, though. When we think about infertility issues, we think about females because females have babies, that's for sure. But it's important to know what the science says. The science says there is about an equal chance of both partners being an issue when infertility is an issue for couples. And that's irregardless of age, and I hear a lot of people talking about geriatric pregnancies. And when I tell you I'm so sick of hearing Kevin Samuel speak about things that he has absolutely no knowledge on, no education on. Dude, you couldn't even finish your own degree. What are you doing? So a geriatric pregnancy or high-risk pregnancies are based off of the history, the health history of the female, not necessarily the age in and of itself, because there are lots of women that are over 50 that have conceived children and their pregnancy has been determined to not be high risk simply because they don't have a risky sexual history. They've not been pregnant and had several miscarriages or what we call spontaneous abortions. They've had no history of intentional abortions because they've never been pregnant before, right? They don't have a history of long-term birth control. So a lot of these things contribute to the possibility of high-risk pregnancy. We identify high-risk pregnancy as being an issue in women over 45 simply because more than likely, this is going to be an issue for some of those women. Men typically say that they think it happens at 35, but no. Women are very viable unless they had a very difficult health history. They can have very viable pregnancies between 35 and 45 with no issues. So to understand the language around geriatric pregnancy, I think that it requires not just a medical degree, but being receptive to the information that's ever changing and evolving in the field of medicine. But sitting before and having those conversations with a fertility expert, a perinatal and prenatal expert, those specialists, because that's exactly what they specialize in. That's what they continue to go through conferences around. And that's how they continue to expand in the field, because they're constantly not only gauging the outcomes of the people that they're treating, but also we're looking at what current science has to say as well. Right. But that's neither here nor there. In other countries outside of America, you have women well into their 60s that have healthy pregnancies, healthy babies. It's just a part of the process. But I think that when men are in defense mode, very much like Kevin Samuel says again, they move into that sign mode. You said, does this mean women of higher incomes have the option not to marry and simply adopt children or employ surrogacy. I think that's kind of what he's speaking to. And the young lady that was interviewed on this particular show, she spoke to the fact that her mother had told her that, you know, she should wait to get married. Hey, AS, how are you? She should wait to get married until after she had finished her education and things like that. And Kevin Samuels was like, your mom gave you bad advice. She just gave you bad advice. She set you up for failure. You're like, your biological clock is ticking. I think the girl was like 30, either 30 or 31. I don't know. But I'm going to say this. It's really important for women that are looking for men of a certain stature. And I'm going to redefine what a high value man is. Sorry, Kevin. But I'm going to help people to understand healthier means to tether themselves to people. So a high value man is a man who adds value to you and the components that you have self-identified as essential to your growth and maturation. The areas of your life that you have self-identified as essential to you coming into a place of acceptance instead of rejection of who you are in your journey to becoming. So that may mean that you need a man to earn a certain amount of money, okay? That may mean that you need a man to earn, you know, a certain amount of tenure on his job, right? Respect from his peers. That may mean that you need a man who respects you and who is able to move into a position of leadership to take authority over certain matters in your household. It may mean that you need a man that simply will not beat you. Every woman is different in what her needs are, and every man is different in what his needs are. But we must recognize that people are not a collective. And so what we need from a person is not going to be universal. There is no way to universally identify that thing. But there is a universal means to identifying what we need in the valuation of the person that we consider to be our partner for life. And so it's about balance. So those things that we sit back and we're doing our introspective work, when we're self-identifying what we need to keep us balanced and we're self-identifying places where we need work, we can look to how a person who's joining our system can continue to contribute to not only our accountability, because we all need accountability partners, but also our overall stability in life. And the same goes for a high value woman. So it's not about a person who makes a specific amount of income. It's more so about a person who is consistent with their goals and their outcomes as it relates to their goals in life. So people who have set goals that are realistic and they have little mini goals, or what I call objectives, right, as to how they're going to meet those goals. And they're very specific about the amount of time they're going to allow themselves to step into these other spaces. So one of the really healthy dating tips that I give people is that when you go on your first date, you want to ask a person, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Like, as opposed to where you are now. This will reveal so much about a person, because it'll tell you whether or not those people are the type of people who plan for positive outcomes. A failure to plan is a plan to fail, literally. So I do not ever want to see someone saying, oh, well, you know what? There's no need to plan. We got to live life a day at a time, and that's it, because we can only control where we are right now. We can only control ourselves, because the reality is you control a lot more than what you think. Your responses to your external environment tell your external environment what to do continuously. It tells your external environment whether or not this thing is working for you. And it tells your external environment whether or not you're tethering yourself to it effectively. So when we talk about resiliency is not putting up with something or tolerating a thing. Resiliency is coming out of a space where we feel like we have to put up or tolerate right? Put up with or tolerate things that don't align with us. Resiliency comes in when we understand that we need to ingest a certain amount of a thing in order for us to move in a different way so that we can teach people new ways to relate to us. That's what resiliency is about. I often see Black people right now trying to create separate spaces from other people in America because they feel like those other people in America don't welcome them into the spaces where they've already established ground. I need Black people to understand you've already been deemed worthy before you ever thought you were unworthy. The inferiority complex comes from understanding that the world around you is not prepared to receive you. And as a result, we start to operate as if we need to suppress another person because there is some subcomponent of us that feels compressed, that feels stepped on, right? As a result, being turned down at some point in our lives. And so we associate that rejection with oppression. So we have to be people who understand that in no way are we inferior to anyone. You says, I never understood Kevin Samuel's high value variable. What if a man has significant income and significant? I know, I said the same thing. And then he talks about the social acceptance component that tells you that for him, he has a history of not being accepted in spaces. And that's an inferiority complex, people. That's what I need you to understand. When you walk through life and you operate from a place of having to be superior to another person, another group of people, or people in general in order for you to feel important, when that's the space that gives you validity, external components, not what you see in self when you're doing that introspective work, but only what other people see you as. If you need validation from other people over that of your own, there may be time for you in that moment to go out and seek therapy. Really, really. So I talked about the fact that Kevin Samuels feels like it's an insult for him to even address the gay rumors, right? I'm curious as to whether or not Kevin Samuels feel like people who are gay and lesbian, does he feel like they are lesser than? That's a question I have, right? And maybe he feels like they're the reason that the Black family has no value anymore. I often hear Kevin Samuels make the reference that there are more women in Atlanta to men. And I talked to you guys a little bit about this before. The thing about making numbers make sense, making statistics make sense, is that there really are no rational points in those numbers as it relates to the conversation that you're having about those numbers. You shouldn't have to make numbers make sense. Make it make sense for me. Because the reality is the sexual orientation of a person definitely has a lot to do with what's really out there and available for them. So you can't compare apples to oranges, okay? So you can't say to women, oh, well, you know what? There are way more women in Atlanta than men, when half of those women you're accounting for are women that like other women. And this woman that you're having a conversation with is a woman who's after a man that likes women, right? And maybe half of that population you're referring to are men who like other men and women. Okay, so my thing is you have to make it make sense, literally. It says Kevin's channels just revealed how a lot of women subconsciously view man as something to be used. You know, and we're going to talk a little bit about that too. And I put that question up already, actually, but that's a fallback method. After men make the statement that women don't need a man because these women are working, right? The way that they justify the odds, right? And the way they justify the problem in society where women are grossly outpaced when it comes to them finding suitors as opposed to men. They say that, okay, well, men don't necessarily need women because we don't necessarily need kids. Every man needs a legacy, unless he's not much of anything at all. So if you don't have value, if you don't have anything to leave on this earth as far as like your imprint, of course you don't need a legacy then. But if you're a man who has value, who wants to make sure that that value is continued to be impressed upon this world after you're no longer physically here, because guess what? Your money can't do that. Your current social approval amongst other men like you can't do that, because those men will die too. That's the reality. They will die. So will you. And so will your ideals. But your legacy is lived on through those people who are of you, and those people who are of them, and those people who are of them. So a man has to have children in order for that to happen. He has to have younger people that he is impacting in order for that to happen. So if we look at the grand scheme of what the real issue is here, Kevin Samuels, he impresses upon men who are in their 50s like him, that are never beens, because you know how we use the word has been for people who had their glory years. They lived out their glory years and they were successful, and now life is a little rough because they can't do the things they used to do anymore. But Kevin Samuels is a person that has never been. So he never acquired the wealth that he says that he was basically worthy of, because he's that high value guy, right? He never acquired these positions until later on in life. I hear him talk about the fact that these women who are out here making all this money with the internet because they're IG models and all this stuff, I hear him talk about the fact that all of this will one day be gone. So what's happening then? What if the internet didn't exist? Where would you be then? So my question then to him is the same thing. The bulk of your financial stability has come from YouTube. That's it. Make it make sense to me. So when YouTube crashes, if YouTube crashes, what have you done as a person to increase your worth, your wealth, and your legacy, Kevin Samuels? Because what you're saying is that you want to find yourself tethered to a younger woman. And when we talk about biological clock ticking, when we talk about sexual equivalency, when we talk about all of the things that matters when it comes to intimacy and relationships and intimate relating, I want to know how many men, in all honesty, that watch this video have never tried a sexual enhancement drug at all in your lifespan. And I want you next to that to type your age. And then I want you to take it another step and then make yourself a personal note. And by the time you get to age 60, I want you to answer that question again. There are no replacements for reality. So if a man in his 50s is pursuing a woman in her 20s, he would be pursuing a woman who is young enough to be his daughter. And I'm curious as to whether or not that's ever resonated in the minds and the hearts and the reflections of people who are sitting out there okaying this, pushing this narrative forward, or any of that. Like, does anybody have a sense of, damn, were you looking at my daughter when she was 10 years old? Were you looking at my daughter when she was 9 years old? Were you having sexualized thoughts of my daughter in her teen ages as we were coming up beside one another, raising our daughters? I feel like there are some other questions that need to be asked of people who approve of this particular age differential when it comes to who and how men are hunting women in this age group. I just feel like that's a general thing that we should be asking questions about, okay? You said, but his channel and ideas, for the most part, when it comes to relationships, applies to the Western world cultures. I'm also talking about Western world cultures in this conversation. That's pretty much it. Men don't have the conversation about their sexual viability. And I agree. I think men don't have that conversation because they see it as an excusable component. I think that men look at the fact that premature ejaculation, sexual dysfunction, or erectile dysfunction or erectile disorder, I think that when they look at that, they see that as a natural component to life, and it's ill important. They don't look at the fact of having to add chemicals to their regimen in order for them to perform sexually and meet the needs, not even meet the needs, but halfway come towards satisfying these younger women. I think that when they look at that for what it is, I think that they're trying to justify the lack of performance with the fact that, you know what, this is a normative thing. It's a pretty normal thing. Pretty normal thing. So my question for men out there who subscribe to the ideals around Kevin Samuel's rhetoric, I want you guys to really sit and ask yourself this thing, okay? If and when you have a daughter, will you look to your friend, your homeboy, the guy next to you at the gym, and will you offer your daughter, your young daughter, your new daughter, your newborn baby, your 2-year-old daughter, 3-year-old daughter, 5-year-old daughter, 10-year-old daughter, will you offer your daughter to the man next to you? So they don't have the convo because they know that women are likely to look past it and less likely to address it. We put up with a lot. Why not this too? I agree, and I'm coming to that point as well. So I feel like women do have to be held accountable for the ideals of men, because when men look at us, when they look at us as women, it has a lot to do with the way that we look to them for approval. And so when we're doing certain things, when we're moving in certain spaces, we do so in such a way. There was this conversation that Kel shared with me, right? That he, one of his experiences when he was a young boy. And he mentioned that there was a young girl across the street from them. And, you know, he lived in the neighborhood with this young girl, and she was in her house and he was in his house. And he and his friend would see her in the house. They would see people come up and take her away and then bring her back. And they never thought anything of it. They thought the girl was just going to work. And then one day he happened to be on the corner and with a friend of his, and this older person, you know, this older boy was trying to negotiate contracts, and the girl was not far away from him, and the girl was the contract being negotiated. So they learned that this young girl was prostituting, right? Selling herself. And so back then, $20 was a lot of money. And he said that after his friend had bought her, and pulled up to go in to where they were going to have sex, he looked at him and said, well, you got next. And he was like, no, I'll just wait out here. And he said that if I had $20 to give it to her, I wouldn't have given her my $20. I would have kept my $20 and spent it on something else, because I had other things that were of value to me. But coming into the idea of acceptance that the girl across the street from him was actually a prostitute was a real tough thing, more so for her than for him, because he noticed that the way that she behaved, maybe when they were outside at the same time and things like that, she was ashamed, because now this young boy knew her truth. So the thing is this: when we behave in spaces, when we do the things that we do and we look to them for approval and we say, is this okay? And we're half afraid to be ourselves in the things that we do. And when we finally find approval in the way that they respond to us, then we start to continue in that same behavior instead of having our own insecurities shape the way that we move with them. It tells them that it's okay for them to shape our outcomes, the expectations for women. And so the reality is women have to do a better job at gauging what behaviors are shaped as a response to men and their approval or disapproval of those said actions. I agree. And so I think that also men have to have a better gauge of how they can value themselves as well. So you notice in the conversation I had about women, I said women, self-approval, right? Same thing goes for men. So when Kevin Samuels makes this whole expansive talk about a high value man can't just decide to name himself a high value man. He has to be accepted amongst other high value men, right? He's speaking to his own experiences where he houses this inferiority complex, and he's gone and he's bought him a woman, right? A sex worker, an escort that costs a pretty penny. And other men who had also bought that same said woman now approved him and welcomed him into their lifestyle and leveled him up, so to say. I need you men to understand this. A man can't both subscribe to submission and at the same time subscribe to leadership and authority. So you can only do one or the other. You can't have both. You can't have both because that's what women are. Literally. So when you hear people refer to you as feminine, that is literally what they mean. Women are the only components, the only people out here, right, who have a mixture of chromosomal makeup and also internally who are out here trying to figure out, how can I balance myself? How can I balance myself? And she needs to balance herself in order to balance her family system, because she has to be able to lead those young people that she's shaping the lives of, the children of the home, and at the same time know when to submit and follow her husband's authority. So naturally, if we talk about the natural orientation of male and woman in a relationship, right, male and female in a relationship, then we're talking about understanding that the woman's position in that relationship is only one where she's learning to properly balance herself when it comes to acquiring the knowledge and insight that she needs to lead her children, the knowledge and insight that she needs to bring to her husband, and then watch for his leadership as it relates to that information. But so I feel like that's what we've got to come into an understanding of. You said, but I thought that kind of woman was run through and had no value. For some men, right? Except the men that now consider themselves to be high value. That's how the coin has flipped. But also as women, I'm telling you, there is something about that accountability component. When we fail to hold other women in our society, in our environments, accountable for the missteps and the misdeeds that they do that misrepresent us as women, this is simply what we run into. We got to do a better job at saying, you know what, this behavior is unacceptable, or it's acceptable and we all move and adapt to the same thing. But we have to be the person that judge whether or not the behaviors, the jobs, the movements, the positions that we find ourselves in and as women are conducive to the overall stability and regard of femininity. The other component is this: as men subscribe to the statutes of the law of Kevin Samuels' high value movement, or Umar Johnson's women ain't shit movement, what is that, thoughty personality disorder? As we move through these and we recognize that these men are subscribing to these values, I think that women have got to stop trying to have combative conversations with men like this. And we've got to just be curious and wonder, Like, what place of discord, what place of imbalance, what place of pain, what place of trauma did this come from? And how can we assist? Because at the end of the day, I think that we have more and more people who don't value who we are over the course of our becoming, because we don't value who we are over the course of our becoming. And that inferiority complex guides the way that we see ourselves. When it comes to race and sexual orientation, I think that Kevin Samuels does a poor job at finding the mitigating factors to the end of viable Black relationships in this culture. I feel like he has a problem with approaching issues around sexual orientation when it comes to his race as a Black man, because I feel like that's a different stigma. And there was a conversation that I saw Umar Johnson have on his 60 million subscribers. Or is it 60 million views? I don't know. I think it's called 60 million views. Umar Johnson's podcast station on YouTube. And I don't know how many YouTubes he's got, okay? But I saw in the video on there that there was a caller that called in and said that there was a couple, and the couple involved a male who now wanted to subscribe to being a woman, and he wanted the sex change or whatever. And as a result of that, the woman is now depressed, doesn't want to get out of the bed and attend to the kids and things like that. And that the woman and the man, the couple, has now told their children that they should call them Maddie, their parents Maddie, which is mom and dad together, mommy and daddy together. And Umar Johnson went on this thing about feeling like these people are messing up the kid's head and all of this stuff simply because they're, going through these shifts. And what does that mean for the family? And what does that mean? Does that mean now the father's going to be out of the home altogether? And blah, blah, blah. Somebody get this man off the internet. I can't take him seriously. So there are larger issues at bay here in a situation where a woman is finding out that her husband is having a really hard time with identifying himself, to the extent that he's self-identified as a feminine energy, where to the extent that he realizes that their children need to now call him something else. He's reinventing himself. He's lost his sense of self. She's submitted and allowed him to be the centralized authority and leader of their family system. And now that Sorry, you guys. I'm not connected to my, what do you call the big computer? The iMac. So, you know, I guess the internet is different when you're on Wi-Fi. But so what I was saying is that for Umar Johnson, he feels like the prevalent issue in that situation is that not of the woman having to recalibrate her stance and where she is as it comes to her having to forcibly adopt new behaviors, new thought processes, and things like that around the fact that her husband is having a problem with his identity. And this identity disturbance is the main issue here. But I feel like he has a problem with people who are part of the lesbian, gay, transsexual community in general when it comes to them rearing kids, because he judges the fabric of their character on their sexual orientation. As it applies to the race component, I think that we have to be people who recognize that the value of people is not in the color of their skin. It's not in the color of their sexual orientation, but it's based off of their character. Your character determines your thought processes, the way that you contribute or decide not to contribute to the world around you, the way that you imprint yourself on others. And so essentially, I feel like we have people that are content creators like Cynthia G, Kevin Samuels, Derek Jackson, Umar Johnson, whatever. All of these folks, I feel like we have these people for a reason. They all allow us to remain tethered and balanced in our experience, right? And I don't even feel like we're doing a good job at balancing ourselves, because I feel like when men are being convinced to step away from the household, I feel like when we have people like Kevin Samuels actually finding some level of numbers to put out there and push a false narrative, because that's his thing. I think that when we have so many people being manipulated with the internet, I feel like that may be the thing that is preventing us from stepping into a place to where we're able to be viable components to the lives of the kids that we're responsible for rearing. When I look at people like Lil Nas X, King Von, those kinds of people, when I'm looking at what their life looks like, when I'm looking at the difficulties that they go through in this life, when I'm looking at the way that they respond to having issues with other people, when I look at the way that they respond to life in general and just operate, I'm curious as to whether or not there was a person that held them accountable, if there was a man that held them accountable in their life, and if there was a woman that sat them down and had the conversations with them around their value, their life, where they were going, what they aspired to be, the way that they impact the world, the way that the world impacts them, what their feelings were around these components. I feel like when we have social media out here, these are conversations that we need to be having with our children. I feel like when we have so much access to the internet and there is very little limitation when it comes to what your kids can access and what they can see, I think we have to have more collaborative conversations about the fact that relationships can look a lot of different ways. But the demise of relationships is not race related directly or sexual orientated or sexual orientation related directly. There are bigger issues around communication, lifespan development, who we are becoming in our journey, whether or not we're prepared and matured through trauma experiences over the course of our development and things like that. So there are larger conversations that we need to be having. I mentioned that there was a young lady on Kevin Samuels' post the other day that talked to how long her parents had been married and things like that. And she talked about her mom conditioning her to feel like it was a woman's job to be a helper to her man. And so women needed to take jobs up in accounting to be able to help her man balance his finances better, right? Or, marketing or something like that. Anything that could contribute to the male and his agenda. Here is the thing. I believe that women can be in a host of positions. I believe that women can acquire a variety of degrees that can be helpful not only to their man, but also to themselves. But I think that the self component is more important. You have to make yourself a primary objective, men and women. You cannot tether yourself to a relationship and effectively contribute to that relationship without first having yourself together. That's just what it is. You have to be selfish with your love. By way of being selfish with your love, when you move into a place of solidarity, autonomy, you can be selfless with the results of that. And so we have to be people that are accountable for our actions, people who can see things for what they are and call a thing a thing. So let's get to calling things a thing. On the bottom of this video, let me know the things that you feel like have impacted the resiliency factors of Black relationships, of white relationships, of other relationships where these community members are impacting other people. What's impacted our viability as people when it comes to us relating and growing with one another? What has gotten us to a point of contention right now where our young people do not want to procreate and continue their legacy lines on because they're too stuck in resistance, defensiveness, and hostility with one another? Like, what's got us in this place? So I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you guys. Thank you so much for your time, your attention today. It's been amazing as usual. Continue the conversation. Don't forget to like and share the content and take care of one another. But more importantly, please, please, please make good choices and consider one another in the things that you do every day, in the way that you adopt new practices in life, in the way that you relate to one another. That's all I've got. Later days.
Who alive can't put me in a box. I redefine any definition you got. I am the tiger, I'm making steps to the top. The flames, I'll rip it up, you just gotta hand me the rock. Take a seat, you cannot stand it. All I know, the flow harder than a Scotch bunny. Don't try studying me, you cannot manage. This ain't what you want, bitch, I'm a fucking phenomenon. This ain't what you want, bitch, I'm a fucking phenomenon. Phenomenon.